In tonight's Dateline Defense, discord in the Middle East. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a fiery speech against the Iranian nuclear deal at the UN General Assembly. He also voiced his appreciation for the U.S. and President Obama. Joining me with the latest is J.D. Gordon, a retired Navy commander and former Defense Department spokesman. He's now executive director of Protect America Today. Well, Netanyahu touched on many topics during his speech to the UN, but one part of his address focused on the relationship between Israel and the U.S. For months, we've seen rising tensions between the two countries over the Iran nuclear deal, but now Netanyahu called America Israel's biggest ally and said he had a deep appreciation for President Obama. J.D., this is so surprising. Was it a step in the right direction to restore the strained relationship? I was kind of surprised.
Hi, Morris. Good to see you. Yes, it's the right decision. And, you know, it's the truth, because without America, Israel would have been wiped off the map in 1948, 1967, and 1973 by a coalition of Arab armies. So America is the best friend of Israel. America gives Israel billions of dollars a year in aid. And if you look at even the Iron Dome, for instance, part of that aid, I mean, Israel wouldn't even survive without the Iron Dome today. So, yeah, it's good that President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu can try to make amends and move forward, because the Iran deal is already sailed. That train's already left the station, if you will. So I think it's good that they patch things up.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just it was quite an olive branch that was extended. Netanyahu also, though, called out Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who one day earlier rallied against Israel, saying Palestinians are no longer bound by the Oslo Accord. Now, what's causing this escalation between the two nations? Some say Abbas made empty threats. Did he?
I don't think so. Morris, conflicts are won and lost today by the battle of ideas. And right now, the Palestinians are winning the battle of ideas. If you look at the UN, you look out throughout Europe, the Palestinians have the upper hand because they're winning the propaganda war, essentially. So that's why they're so emboldened. If you look at the Palestinian leadership in the Gaza Strip, that's Hamas, a terrorist organization. They want to wipe Israel off the map. And if you look at the leadership in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, those areas there, that's led by the Fatah. Fatah used to be the PLO before. Well, Fatah only wants Israel to exist if it's not a Jewish majority state. So really, the Palestinian leadership, either from Hamas on one side or Fatah on the other, and their rivals, none of them want Israel to exist as a Jewish state. So that's a real problem for Israel, but the Palestinians are winning the battle of ideas at the UN and in capitals throughout Europe, and they're doing better now in Washington than they've ever done.
J.D., let's switch gears to Syria. Russia is launching airstrikes, but reports indicate Moscow was targeting anti-Assad rebels and not ISIS. The U.S. condemned the strikes, and some analysts say it makes Putin a target for Sunni Muslims. So how much more complicated did the situation in Syria get, and what role should the U.S. play in this conflict?
I agree it's going to get more complicated. I agree with Secretary Carter yesterday. He said Russia is pouring gasoline on fire. That's absolutely true. Russia's only in this for Russia. They're propping up Bashar al-Assad because Tartus is the naval base that they have in Syria. That's the only base the Russians have outside of the former Soviet Union, number one. Number two, Bashar al-Assad buys billions of dollars in Russian weaponry. And so Bashar al-Assad is propped up by Vladimir Putin. But the thing is, the longer Bashar al-Assad stays in power, the longer this civil war is going to go on. So it's counterproductive. It's only about helping Russia, propping up one of their allies, a brutal dictator, and it helps Iran as well. So, yeah, Secretary Carter was absolutely right in this. It's pouring gasoline on a fire.
All right, I'm wondering, well, is the situation going to continue to get worse, and how can the problem be fixed? I mean, do we have any answers?
It's going to get worse before it gets better, but here's what I believe. You know, when I was a Navy lieutenant, Morris, I was in the former Republic of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. They were at each other's throats. They broke up into different countries, Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia. I think the same thing needs to happen in Syria, in Iraq. I think they should be partitioned so that the different regions, the Sunnis, they're in the north and in the east of Syria. Same thing, they're in the north and the west of Iraq. They can have their own country. The Alawites, who are only 10% of Syria, but the Alawites, it's a branch of Shia, they dominate the Sunnis. They've dominated them for a century. So I think the Alawites ought to have their own country. Same thing in the south of Iraq. They're the Shia there. They ought to have their own country. I think we need to seriously look at partitioning both Syria and Iraq. You could freeze the battle lines in place. The Kurds can have their own country in the north part of Iraq, north of Syria, and then the Alawites, part of the Shia, and then the Sunnis can all have their own parts of their own countries, mini states. Because if you look at the Islamic State right now, Morris, ISIS, they own the majority Sunni areas. So if you partition Syria and Iraq, the battle lines could be frozen in place. Then it's just a matter of sending Sunni Arabs in there to get rid of the Islamic State, because anybody else going into the fight the Islamic State with ground troops are going to be the enemy.
Yep.
Doesn't matter if it's Americans, Russians, Shia, they're all going to be occupiers.
Not
so you
a
got to
bad
have Sunnis
idea.
do it.
Well, something we've heard before, and I think you're right. All right, before you go, JD, I'd like to get your take on the latest Secret Service scandal. An Inspector General report showed dozens of employees tried to dig up dirt on Representative Jason Chaffetz. The Republican congressman was targeted after he came down on the agency, calling for reform in light of the scandals at the Secret Service. What's your take on this, JD?
I think this is something you'd see in Venezuela or a third world country. Government employees just don't act like that in the United States. It's horrendous. I think they have a real leadership problem at the Secret Service. It's like another day, another embarrassment. How much lower are they going to go? So they can be prosecuted with criminal proceedings, these dozens of agents that allegedly did this. There ought to be a thorough investigation, criminal proceedings, and we're looking at misdemeanors probably. However, more importantly, they should lose their jobs and security clearances, because that's not how we operate in America.
It's quite a mess. JD Gordon, Executive Director, Protect America Today. Thanks again, JD.
Thank you, Morris.